Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Dennis Prager here. The man I am about to introduce, I have had on my show, I believe now, for at least go back 20 years, I would think. He is one of the, if not the leading expert on terror, domestic and otherwise, in the United States. Certainly one of them, if not the, as I say. He's executive director of the Investigative Project on Terrorism, Steve Emerson. And you're one of those, I have to say, Steve, it's painful for me to say, but I love truth. I always have on when there's something bad going on. If you're on my show, it's not a good sign.
I'm sorry to harbinger bad news. Yes. My mother always said I selected this profession to avoid getting married, but the fact of the matter is, we live in a world of bad news, and as much as Americans are optimistic, and they should be, about the world, which we helped shape, the fact is that we no longer are able to help shape it, and if we don't, we're in for really worse times.
Well, let me take that last point and then get to specifics of ISIL, ISIS, America, etc., and some things that you have just discovered about Hamas. But would you say we have withdrawn? Is that the reason, or it's just the forces are too powerful that even if we don't withdraw, we can't shape?
I think it's a combination of things. I think we made strategic errors. Fundamental strategic errors that were born out of a misguided, and I'll be charitable, misguided philosophy that somehow we could compartmentalize different radical Islamic groups, not subsume them under one umbrella in which they all follow a specific ideology, radical Islam, a hatred for the infidels, a rejection of Western values, and we sort of put them in different boxes. Hamas could be a political entity. Hezbollah could be, shaped by talking to Iran. Jaish Mohammed could be talking to Pakistan. Al-Nusra could be tamed by giving support for the Islamist moderates. We never really put them all together to the extent that this administration, helped put this, fuel this confusion. They banned the use of the term radical Islam. So it sort of metastasized throughout Europe, throughout the Middle East, and unfortunately even in the United States. So, one, we help fuel this proliferation, and two, I think you're right, to a certain extent, we're no longer in control because the problem is so much out of the box that it's taken on a life of its own.
If I could, I would actually replay what you just said prior to the last. The last sentence was perfectly valid, but it was a separate point. It drove me, and I'm so glad to know an expert like you affirms this, it drove me out of my mind all these years when they were all listed as separate, or when it was said, oh, well, we got rid of Osama bin Laden, therefore we have decapitated the head. Yes, we decapitated the head of one group. So what?
Well, the point is that Al-Qaeda became the term for the substitute for the term radical Islam. In other words, anytime there was a radical Islamic event, the president and his assistants would always invoke the term Al-Qaeda, wherever it was. But if it was a Hamas event, a Hamas attack, it would never be considered radical Islam. It would either be dismissed, ignored, or said to be part of a problem that could have, quote, underlying grievances. That is, if Israel only conceded to a Palestinian state, it would stop, which of course is nonsense, because Memory just published this morning a video on its site saying that the leader of the Gaza imams just said we will not rest until the entire liberation of Palestine is complete. That's number one. So number two, for the term radical Islam, which was banned, we use the euphemism, quote, extremism. And the term was used, how do we combat extremism? What do you mean extremism? What type of extremism? Is it eco-extremism? Is it animal extremism? I mean, it was a meaningless term. And then the third thing we did that was really outrageous was that we embraced all these front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood. they fund groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations, which was an unindicted co-conspirator in a Hamas terrorist case, and many other groups were invited into the White House, as we documented.
All right, we're going to continue in a moment, Steve Emerson, and there's something actually that we could all do about this. I'll be back in a moment. I'm Dennis Prager. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. If you missed Steve Emerson's last segment, you should do everything you can to hear it. He's on with me still, but this is so essential to understanding what has happened. Tell me, Steve, if this is a fair way of, even a very accurate way of giving an analogy to what you said. It would be as if we never used the term cancer. Instead, we labeled pancreatic cancer, pancreatic extremism, lung cancer, lung extremism, and none of them had anything to do with the other. Is that a fair way of expressing it?
Absolutely. I mean, the degree of the lack of any type of connection or logical extension between the two is profound, and that means never solve. You could never even work on the problem of pancreatic cancer, let alone treat it. The same thing is true for, let's say, anti-black racism. Let's say there's racism in the United States. There's white racism. So no one would just talk about racism. It's like the Northern Ireland conflict. When there was conflict between Catholics and Protestants, the reporting always talked about militant Catholics and militant Protestants. That was considered normal. That's the way you identified people, by who was the extremist. Now we have a situation where, quote, Islamophobia, a fabricated term designed to intimidate any critic of radical Islam, is invoked and used to deter and intimidate any critic, and the politicians in power, especially this administration and many social democratic governments in Europe, have bought into this. And so that's why Europe is experiencing so many problems when they incorporated all these Islamic groups into their governments as advisory groups, many of which have sent their own volunteers to ISIS. And in this country, we have a situation where hundreds of groups under the umbrella of, quote, interfaith and outreach have been invited to meet with the president, with the White House, with the National Security Council. You have a head of the CIA who says that jihad only means peace and love. And
he said that? He said, I wasn't familiar with that. Who said that?
John Brennan, 3 years ago at NYU, gave a speech and said that jihad doesn't mean holy war. It has nothing to do with violence. I'm paraphrasing it. I have it on tape. He says it means a peaceful struggle, and that's it. And we shouldn't call these violent extremists, he doesn't call them Islamic, we shouldn't call them jihadis because they have nothing to do with Islam. They have everything to do with Islam. That's the problem. And I'm not saying that all Muslims are terrorists. Far from it. The vast majority, are largely peaceful and moderate, but there is a sizable minority that are not. And unless we recognize that, and recognize that many and disproportionate number of the groups and organizations representing them are radical and say one thing in English and another in Arabic, we're only fooling ourselves, but continuing at self-deception that's going to lead to our own demise.
All right, now let's specifically talk about Hamas. So we have Boko Haram, we have Al Qaeda, we have Hezbollah, we have Al Qaeda in Mesopotamia, Islamic State. Is Hamas in that group?
Without doubt. Without doubt, it is absolutely part of the spectrum of radical Islamic groups, largely under the organization called the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood, founded nearly 100 years ago, whose motto is jihad, to expand the domain of Islam around the world and establish a caliphate. That is the established goal of ISIS, the established goal of Boko Haram, even Hamas. And they all engage in genocidal attacks against local minorities, whether that be Yazidis, Christians, Jews. They all have in common extrajudicial executions. They all have in common the notion that Islam has to remain supreme and expand its base of operations. Look, that is the problem here. We refuse to identify all of them with the same characteristics that apply to all of them. We have no problem applying the same characteristics to neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan. No problem at all. Why don't we have the same willingness to apply the same common denominator to these
All right,
groups?
listen, because of the time factor, and I want to ask people, please, folks, please sign the petition, Stop Hamas Now. The importance of these petitions having large numbers of names, the importance for the fabric of the society and for our politicians can't be overstated. Folks, it's all we're asking. Just send your name. StopHamasNow.com, and there's a banner at my website. Do you endorse this?
Absolutely, without doubt. This is a way of notifying and informing the government, Congress, the administration of how many Americans believe that Hamas is a radical Islamic terrorist group beyond redemption. We shouldn't be negotiating or forcing Israel to negotiate with it. It should be treated just the same way as ISIS.
You got about a minute here. Tell us what you have just published on your Investigative Project on Terrorism website about the Hamas training manual.
The Hamas training manual talks about use of human shields. It talks about, which is the civilian population, which they admit they use to protect themselves from Israeli retaliation. They talked about the use of storing weapons in mosques, in hospitals, in kindergartens. They had openly admitted. They talk about the notion of aiming at civilians in Israel to kill as many as Jews as possible. And they also talk about the fact that ultimately they will liberate all of Palestine,
the
entire state of Israel, to commit an act of genocide that will rival that of ISIS.
It's the Investigative Project on Terrorism. I've been getting their emails for years. I suggest that to all of you, and please sign the petition, StopHamasNow.com. It's also a banner at my website. Thank you so much, Steve Emerson. 12 days ago, the Wall Street Journal reported that supply of Hellfire missiles was canceled because U.S. officials are demanding to review Israeli requests on an individual basis. Your signing this petition says the American people are against Hamas and for Israel in this conflict. That's very important. That's the reason for, one of the many reasons for your signing that, StopHamasNow.com. Or just go to my website and doing the petition. So listen to